Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron is up this week. What are you bringing to the table today?
I'm bringing Solidarity by Leah, Hunt-Hendrix, and Astra to the table today.
Yes.
There is, this is a book. It's great. There's an introduction, 8 chapters, and a conclusion. There's a lot in this book, just as you could tell by that little brief thing. But anyway, it was great, and there's a lot in it. So I think let's just talk about the first half of the book today. So that'll be the introduction up to the end of chapter 4.
Okay.
So those chapters that we'll talk about are the introduction, the origins of a debt, us versus them, power in numbers, and divide and conquer.
Yes.
All really great concepts that talk about both forming transformative solidarity and that concept that they talk about, but also how the status quo and sort of powerful political elites divide us up.
Yes.
So then next week, we'll talk about the rest of the book.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I just mentioned, this book is really about a concept they call transformative solidarity, because they recognize that solidarity is not always a positive force. The bonds of solidarity could form through reactive and violent groups, and there are lots of examples of those throughout history, many of which are operating today.
Yeah.
And not all of them are groups, some of them are governments. But the book is focused on transformative solidarity, which is, quote, the kind that propelled the fight for civil rights, along with other movements that have sought to expand the circle of inclusion while also altering society's very character.
Yes.
So they explain their understanding of solidarity even further in another section of the introduction when they say, quote, fundamentally, we understand solidarity as the recognition of our inherent interconnectedness, an attempt to build bonds of commonality across our differences. It is an ethos and spur to action rooted in the acknowledgement that our lives are intertwined. Intertwined, however, does not mean indistinguishable. Solidarity depends on difference, on recognizing that we are not all exactly alike, but that we can still come together and take collective action. It is not unity or sameness, but a way of connecting with others, forging new communities, developing shared visions, and building power to push for social change. So as we talk about solidarity today and next week, we'll talk about, this is what we will talk about when we mention solidarity, this vision of transformative solidarity that is pushing for social change and altering the very way that our society is organized. So yeah, let's get to it. What stood out to you? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I want to start by saying first, that was a great introduction to the book.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm so excited that we finally get to talk about this book, especially since we went to their talk at Politics and Prose. So I've really been eager to pick this book up and read it, and for us to finally get a chance to talk about it. It's been a phenomenal read so far. I'm not finished, so thank you for splitting it up. But I have learned so much so far about the concept of solidarity, of transformative solidarity, and the usefulness of it and the power of it as a way to guide us and get us to the just society we all deserve. It's just, there's so much brilliance in this book. And so, I'm excited to talk about it. I really appreciated how they talk about transformative solidarity being all about our collective struggle, right? And you mentioned this, even though we're not all the same, transformative solidarity reminds us that we're still connected beings.
Yes.
And we can come together and accomplish incredible things and take collective action and make social change happen. And I think when we do that, it's powerful. And so you mentioned that great quote from the introduction, and there's a part of it a little bit later of what you brought to the table here in the intro that I wanted to share. And you talked about this. They talk about transformative solidarity as being this force for good. And so it's this force, as they say, quote, that achieved universal suffrage, won the 8-hour workday as well as the weekend, made the modern welfare state viable, defeated Jim Crow, enshrined disability rights, and much more. Solidarity has stretched across the globe, linking abolitionists in the 19th century, national independence movements in the 20th, and activists agitating for the cancellation of sovereign debt in the 21st. It is the tie that binds women, queer, and trans people, as well as workers and debtors, fighting for equality and freedom today. Transformative solidarity is both a means and an end, the process of struggling together and a way of describing a kind of society that is more just and mutualistic. And I had to pull that quote. I'm glad you did too. Like when I think about that quote and everything, you talked about and what transformative solidarity has been able to help us and our leaders and our governments and our activists and our movements in particular accomplish. And they talk about so much of that in the book that we've read so far. It kind of blows my mind in such a great way and just reinforces how much of a powerful concept and strategy transformative solidarity truly is.
Yeah, it's a framework. And I think one of the things I didn't mention is how much the impetus they had for writing this book is that solidarity is not something that has been studied as much as things like justice. And so they talk about that in the start of the book. There's not a lot of literature about what solidarity actually means and how to use it as a strategy or how to think about it as a philosophy even for following through on achieving these things that you mentioned, like the 8-hour workday and the weekend and getting rid of Jim Crow and all of these things.
Right.
So I think, it's a strategy, and they talk about it in that way, and they talk about it as being both a strategy and kind of more than that too.
Yes, absolutely. Good
So
point.
one of the key takeaways for me from the first half of the book that we're talking about was from the us versus them chapter.
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about how important it is to define who we are and who the opponent to that we is.
Yes.
So they say, quote, solidarity is polarizing. It constructs a community and names an opponent, engaging in a contest for power to transform society. This tension is what gives transformative solidarity its power, its fighting edge, its revolutionary spirit. Polarization can be generative, not just destructive. So I think when we can do the work of understanding the we and who it is we are and who it is we are opposed to, it's important. It names what's happening, what it is that we're striving for, what it is we're fighting against. And they go on to say, quote, transformative solidarity also requires an adversarial politics, one that brings us together across lines of race, gender, and citizenship by naming our real adversary, the small class of people who aim to divide and exploit for dominance and profit.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, and I think that concept is so important because this happens when transformative solidarity movements get chided for behaving in the same way as reactionary movements by excluding people and naming them as an opponent. And I think it's so important to recognize that transformative solidarity does have opponents because we're striving for something to which people are opposed. Right. And so therefore they are our opponents.
Right.
I think this definition here really outlines who the opposition is. It's the small class of people who want to divide and conquer, the people who demonize anyone they consider other, and therefore want us to consider those people other. Mm-hmm. And this definition here includes so many of us.
Oh, yeah.
The we here is huge. This names billionaires and political elites as the them. Mm-hmm. And this gives us space to welcome in so many people into a coalition for changing the economic system and abolishing white supremacy and patriarchy and pursuing decolonization. You know, all of the stuff, addressing all of the isms, all of the systems of oppression.
Yes, all of the social ills, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
And if we can recognize that we're all harmed and we're all in peril for the benefit of a very small group of people who are exploiting us for profit and power, we can change all this stuff because we'll recognize the power that we hold collectively. As the authors mention, it gives us power, it gives us a fighting edge, it gives us a revolutionary spirit.
Oh, yeah.
And we can overturn the tables that the powerful sit at, that the billionaires sit at, that they made for themselves, and create something new that is not focused on table, but that centers the well-being of everyone instead of the wealth and the power of the few who sit around the tables that they built.
Yeah, at chapter 2 and that concept of us versus them, I think is a really good one. And I'm glad it came so early in the book because I think you're right. It's a central topic to understanding what transformative solidarity is all about. And I love that they stress that in order to build a more inclusive world, we have to be clear about what and who we are and what and who we are not. And that is a way of helping us figure out what social conditions have to be changed, and then we can work together to fight for that change. So yeah, I very much so appreciated that us versus them concept. And one of the other things I think a little later in the chapter that they talk about as sort of an application of this concept of us versus them is they talk about how it can be used to address racism. So there's this quote that I pulled. They say, quote, "The best way to fight racism is with solidarity," Black Panther Fred Hampton proclaimed shortly before he was murdered in his sleep by the police. Ian Haney Lopez agrees. "I don't want to fight the fight about your identity," he told us. "I want to construct an ideology that says your identity is being used against you, and that links you to others." In other words, we must find ways to help more people, particularly but not exclusively white people, understand that racism directed at others hurts them too, even if indirectly, and that their lives and well-being would be improved by increasing power for Black, brown, and immigrant families. And so you started to talk about that a little bit too, and I love it's not exclusively white people, but let's target them too. And then just a little bit later in that chapter, they also apply the same concept of us versus them to class. So they say, quote, "Cross-race solidarity can be strengthened by foregrounding class exploitation and by articulating the ways racism and other divisions are deployed to protect the interests of the plutocrats at the top. By revealing commonalities along one axis of our identity, in this case class, we can begin to recognize and address oppression among other lines. We can find connection without collapsing our differences." So for me, there were so many lessons in this chapter about this idea of us versus them that really helped inform the way I want to continue to think about the connectedness of us as a people and the connectedness of us in our struggle and the work that we're doing. And I just appreciated it, again, being so early in the book and helping frame the rest of my learning throughout the other chapters and thinking about how we can use that thinking to bring other folks along in this work as well.
Yeah, I think that the us versus them chapter, I mean, all of it really, but the us versus them chapter, there's so much in there about, I mean, they mentioned Fred Hampton and that quote, I think, so clearly outlines that idea of who is us and who is them. And, I don't remember all of his quote, they pulled a little bit about it, but we're not going to fight racism with racism. We're going to fight it with solidarity.
Yes.
We're not going to fight capitalism with Black capitalism. We're going to fight it with, I think he said socialism. I don't quite remember, but the things that we are all harmed by, we have to recognize that we are harmed by them to become the us.
Yes.
And I think that's the challenge. But yeah, I think that there's so much in that chapter and
Absolutely.
so much in all the stuff you brought too. So moving on from us versus them, the divide and conquer chapter had some really great analysis and understanding of how the billionaires and political elites that we talked about in the us versus them part work to split us up from one another so that we're fighting against one another instead of being in solidarity against them. And we're seeing a lot of that play out now too, in a variety of ways.
Feels very relevant, yes.
Both in sort of labor things, but also in decolonization, resistance to genocide in Gaza, a lot of stuff. So they listed some concepts that create this separation, which they called tools and techniques. These are the things that political elites and billionaires and those types of folks who built their tables and are sitting at them as they're sitting there together having a conference, they talk about and use these tools: separation and supremacy, competition and consumerism, regulation and criminalization, alienation and loneliness. So you can see how so many of those, just from that title, impact us and create either superficial divisions or realign our collective values as a people so that we don't see the way that we're being exploited.
Right.
So at one point in the sections about alienation and loneliness, they summarize a line of thinking from Hannah Arendt, who's a German-American political theorist. So their summary of her thoughts were this, quote, "Loneliness is the antithesis of political belonging. It is a symptom of what she called worldlessness or world alienation, a state that arises when people's full humanity cannot be expressed in community with others. The lonely person is caught in a world where no one can be relied upon, and collective action appears futile. Feeling cut off and deserted, even in the physical presence of others, they are susceptible to propaganda." And so this is so spot on because we're seeing this play out now.
Right.
And we can see this operate in the way that our political parties are working in the U.S. currently. This is a main tenet of Trump's campaigns, for example. He understands that people feel lonely, and he gives them propaganda that tells them that they won't be left behind anymore if they just vote for him.
Right.
Which is a standard operating procedure of elites who are sitting at those tables. But he has figured out a way to talk to people in a specific, direct way that make them feel like they won't be left behind anymore.
Heard and yep, absolutely.
And so this is that other version of solidarity that Leah and Astra mentioned early on in the book, the reactionary solidarity. But they go on to talk about a potential response to this by saying, quote, in striking contrast to her description of totalitarianism as organized loneliness, Hannah Arendt described her ideal democracy, or polis, as a space of organized remembrance, which I think is an amazing vision for a community. It's an amazing vision for something beyond what it is we have today and what it is we've known, and the concept of nation states. In my mind, it's another version of Dr. King's beloved community.
Yeah.
And it highlights how important it is to remember one another and how interconnected we are, how interdependent we are, and what we need in a collective manner, and recognizing the basic human needs that we have.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, a place to live, food to eat, right? All those things are all necessary things that when we have organized remembrance, maybe we understand that we all have those basic needs and beyond those things, right? Those are just two very simple examples.
Simple, but huge.
Yeah,
Simple,
foundational.
Yeah, absolutely.
Organized remembrance. I loved that concept.
It's such a brilliant concept, and it, to me, that speaks to all of the insight and wisdom and brilliance in chapter 4. So I'm glad you brought that up. We've experienced so much division in this country, and other countries have as well, that has been exacerbated by conservative leaders and folks like Trump and movements. And so one of the things I pulled from that chapter, Leah and Astra shared some insight from a study. They say, quote, a 2014 study that looked at platforms from 450 parties in 41 countries between 1945 and 2010 found that as inequality rises, conservative parties elevate racial and religious grievances, with a caveat that they only do so, the study found, in places that already had levels of social division that made them ripe for such conflict. Under such conditions, conservative leaders the world over paint various others as existential threats in order to distract from pertinent issues and deflect blame from themselves, even if they risk further destabilizing society in the process. And so to me, I just was like, ding, 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 like that. That what is that, Leo DiCaprio meme, like that. And one of the other things that I think is related to all of this and is a tool that conservative leaders use and have relied upon, and is this suppression of history and historical fact. And you started to mention this. We've talked about this on the podcast before. And I think Hannah Arendt, I want to read some more of her stuff because her thinking is brilliant around this. You shared their reflections on a quote from her. A little bit later, they say, Arendt reminds us that the erasure of historical truth is another method by which the powerful suppress solidarity. Selective amnesia, the whitewashing of troubled legacies and disavowal of responsibility, enables both willful ignorance and a naive faith in progress. Nowhere is this more clear than in the United States, where the right wing shores up power through the enforcement of strategic forgetting. Those who honestly recount the bigoted and brutal origins of the United States are denounced, Confederate memorials are defended, and school textbooks and classroom debate are censored. And so again, ding, 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 that is happening here. And so I think it's another important takeaway from this chapter is everything you shared. We know the playbook of conservatives because we know and we honor our history. We've seen this before. And so to me, that's why the lessons that Astra and Leah share in this book about the usefulness and the power of transformative society and recognizing, the things that we're seeing are so important. And there are ways they're going to help us employ this strategy, this framework in our work.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that this also reminds me of is we talked about organized abandonment recently. Yeah. And organized remembrance feels like a great antidote to that as well. It is a way to find each other so that we're not erased by the powerful, that we don't have this selective amnesia, that even when we're vilified for standing up for understanding the real history of this country and the real history of violence, of colonization, settler colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, all of those things and how they're intertwined, when we remember those things, we can find pathways forward out of them, I think. And that's a key concept here. And so I also just thought about how this organized remembrance connects to the organized abandonment concept too, and serves as a potential antidote.
Yeah. Well, what you just said there makes me think about so many of the media and the things we bring to the table have like reference charts and like, things for future learning. And I think that like these key concepts are things that need to be pulled from this book and studied and you know, how can we hand this out to everybody? Because you're right, there's some real brilliance in all of that. If I can, we didn't talk a whole lot about chapter 3.
Yeah.
It was called Power in Numbers. And in that chapter, Astra and Leah talked about and analyzed how kind of throughout history, people have come together to challenge authority in an effort to improve their lives. And so in the chapter, they shared how groups of people have come together to do really incredible things, like organize for better working conditions via labor unions, engage in organizing work during the movement for disability justice, how millions of people marched in the streets and demanded racial justice in the summer of 2020, as an example, or even how debtors went on strike and forced the government to grant billions of dollars in relief. And there were so many more examples of this in the chapter and throughout the book. But I think this power in numbers concept in transformative solidarity is so important. Yeah. We can certainly fight for what's right in our own localized places and spaces, but I think a big takeaway from this chapter for me was that there's also incredible potential for real change when we come together in mass as well. And so one of the things that they end the chapter with is this, quote, "These examples and many more remind us that when we come together in an organized fashion, forging new self-conceptions, embracing radical visions, and acting strategically, we can wield the power of numbers to disrupt business as usual, wrest concessions, and pave the way for future victories. This is why powerful interests are so hell-bent on making sure we stay divided." I just wanted to share some of that wisdom from chapter 3 because we didn't get to talk about it, but there's brilliance everywhere in this book, and I don't want to miss any of it.
Yeah, and I think that's the chapter where they talk about outside agitators, quote unquote, showing up into the South, and that giving the people in that community the understanding that they're not alone, which then allowed them to create a new self-concept about how their struggle is interconnected to other people's struggle across the South during Jim Crow in particular, and changed the trajectory of that resistance to Jim Crow. And so, there's a lot in that chapter as well about how we all come together in the midst of, you know, understanding each other and understanding the power we hold together against the people at the table to fight against those systems that are working against all of us and are harmful to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey there, folks. Sorry for the interruption, but we wanted to invite you to join us over on Patreon.
Yeah, we're so excited to be on Patreon and be able to create some additional content and opportunities for us to learn and unlearn together.
That's right. We'll be rolling out some new ways you can join us in our collective learning and unlearning over the next few weeks.
So you can join for free and get some regular updates from us. And we'll also have paid tiers available as well with extra content available each month.
You can find us at patreon.com/interdependent-study and join us today.
That's right. You can join right now at patreon.com/interdependent-study. Okay, now back to the episode.
Patreon.com/interdependent-study. All right, let's talk about application of the first half of this book.
Yes.
We'll definitely pull some more lessons in application from the second half. My application comes from the Us versus Them chapter. Okay. Specifically, this was in the section about regulation and criminalization. And Leah and Astra quote Robert G. Ingersoll, who was a social reformer. So he said, "If the rich meet to reduce wages, that's a conference. If the poor resist the reduction, that's a conspiracy, which I want on a poster or sticker or something, or all of those things. Because it's such a succinct encapsulation of how our society works.
Yes.
And we're seeing all of it play out again in real time on the news, on social media, and in all the things. And they go on to say it a little differently later in the chapter when they say, quote, standing up to injury and oppression is treated as the crime, while perpetrators of violence at scale are treated as victims. So we're seeing this again play out across the country. We've been seeing it now for years.
Yes.
And people standing up to genocide or police violence or economic inequality, they're all vilified. And the cops are sent after them to break up their demonstrations or encampments or have pepper spray in their face or have tear gas thrown at them. And that response reifies the dynamics that are being protested in the first place.
Yes.
Where people standing up to oppression, up to harm, up to violence.
The status quo.
Yeah, those people are then vilified and become outcasts and are labeled as different from us, quote unquote. And so it's used as another wedge to drive people apart from one another because they don't feel aligned with those people who are being arrested or being tear gassed or whatever. So I think that's a direct application. How do we see ourselves in those moments? And who is it that we understand ourselves to be as individuals? And then what does that mean for how we align ourselves in the future in transformative solidarity movements?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Hopefully our friend Robert Ingersoll does have that on a poster or a sticker, some of that quote, because it was really good.
Yeah, I think Robert Ingersoll might have lived before the time of posters and stickers.
Okay. Well, someone listening out there,
as I
take that up. You're trying to Google it.
Yes.
Well, while you do that,
Robert Ingersoll died in 1899.
Oh, well, a long time ago. I can say a long time ago because that was a long time ago. Sometimes when people say a long time ago, it's in my lifetime, and that hurts my feelings. Maybe some people who are listening can relate.
This was in the late 1800s.
Woo! How about that? I think that was a brilliant application, my friend. I was thinking about just this idea of how powerful transformative solidarity is as a strategy for helping us to fight for social change. And I know I talked about this a little bit earlier, but what's so brilliant about this book is that each chapter that we've read so far has focused on a particularly troubling aspect of our society where transformative solidarity has been able to be used as a strategy to unite us and to make life better for the collective us. And so there's just, again, so much wisdom here. So that to me, though, is the application of this. Astra and Leah, sort of towards the end of the introduction, say, quote, only by cultivating solidarity will we be able to resist the destructive politics of divide and conquer, challenge the special interests profiting from perils including war, climate change, and technologies like artificial intelligence, and reconstruct political institutions corroded by decades of profit-seeking and self-dealing. The solidarity we seek to cultivate reaches across space and time, making amends for the abuses and errors of the past, while ensuring the habitability of the planet for generations to come. And I just think that's something we can all get behind. So I just love that quote and wanted to share it.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Yeah. Political institutions corroded by decades of profit-seeking and self-dealing. Yeah,
there it is.
All right, great stuff. Well, let's talk about homework. What do we want to do to continue our learning beyond our conversation today? Well, the obvious part is to get to the second half of this book in our next episode. But I think I'd like to learn a little bit more about and from Hannah Arendt, who we referenced earlier. Her perspective on how much loneliness can drive us toward propaganda and a totalitarian or fascist sort of outlook in government, I think was really insightful and is very relevant to what we're seeing today. So learning more from and about her would be great. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I join you in that. I'm also very excited to finish this book for obvious reasons. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they continue to make connections between transformative solidarity and the ongoing work and fight for social justice and collective liberation and all the things we talk about here. The other thing I want to do for homework is to just learn more about Leah and Astra's other work and learn from it and engage with it. So in 2012, Leah co-founded Solidaire, which is a national network of philanthropists dedicated to funding progressive movements. And then in 2017, she co-founded Way to Win, which is a similarly structured network dedicated towards electoral strategy. So I'd love to learn more about what those networks have been able to do and accomplish in their time. And then for Astra, we read one of her other books, Remake the World. At this point, it was a couple years ago, which is just kind of wild. It was back in 22. And so maybe we can bring another one of her books later this year, or even be one of the first books we read in 2025.
Sure. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, this is the time where we talk about next week's topic and our media. And you're up next time, but I guess not really.
Yeah.
So how about I bring the second half of this book to the table next week instead? I'll give you the week off.
I thank you. I need it. Well, yes, we definitely should do that. We've got to finish this incredible book and yeah, think about all of the reflections from it, from the second half, but also as a whole. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to finishing it. We should probably share. Do you want to share the remaining chapters of the book?
Sure.
So folks have a preview of that.
So yeah, there's 4 more chapters in the conclusion. So chapter 5 is the problem with charity. Chapter 6 is a solidarity state. 7, solidarity beyond borders. 8, solidarity and the sacred. And the conclusion is called the virtues of solidarity.
Ooh.
So yeah, all great stuff. I didn't mention this earlier, but I have a little highlighter with little flags that are in there. I ran out of those flags like 60% of the way through this book, so I had to go get other ones. There's a lot highlighted in my book, as you can now tell.
We have to get you another one.
Yeah, I guess I have another one. I just have to change colors.
Okay.
So it's, maybe there's a refill for the little plastic flags that 3M puts in the end of my highlighter.
I'm sure 3M has that.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok. Check us out on YouTube. Sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And how brilliant it is that we can say that with a book like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk to you next week.